it's hard every time it happens. But how are you going to honor and glorify God through it and set that person up for success wherever they're going, however they're leaving?
Yeah. I think the best transitions are...
Welcome back to the Marketing as Missions podcast. I am one of your hosts, Jeff.
And I'm Mandy.
And today we're going to be talking about something pretty specific.
Yeah.
But is something that we've talked about, and it seems that we've been through a lot of these.
In multiple different settings.
And we thought, you know what, if we've been through this in not that old of a lifetime yet,
Well,
then
just say within 30 years.
something like that. Yeah, we'll go with that. It would be beneficial to share some of our stories so that you can possibly learn how we've handled it in the past, how we've handled it right, how we've handled it wrong, and maybe glean some wisdom out of it. And Mandy, what is that topic today?
I was about to say, they're probably at the edge of their seat going, what are we? But they probably have the description.
They probably do have the title in the description.
We're going to be talking about pastoral transitions. The good, the bad, and the ugly. What is a pastoral transition?
Yeah, well, I think they happen for quite a few reasons. And when we were sitting down to talk about what we wanted to kind of communicate today is, what does a pastoral transition look like and why do they happen? And really, we kind of came up together of like 4 overarching ways that pastoral transitions happen. And the first one's kind of morbid, literally, but it's when your pastor dies.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe unexpectedly, maybe it has been expected, but there's no transition plan in place, or
the sickness would move faster than expected, and so it was just one of those where it just happened.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes deaths just happen randomly too. So retirement, because pastors don't live forever, and a lot of them reach an age and go, I want to retire.
Taking care of sheep is hard and stinky, and sometimes they just want to retire. And then unfortunately, sin is another reason for pastoral transition. Something has gone wrong in their life and they need to be backed out of ministry, whether that's their own call or the call of somebody else on the church. That is a reason for pastoral transition.
And finally, new opportunities. God moves and changes people's lives in all different stages. And so even our pastor now was a pastor before, was called into missions, came back to a pastorate. So God can transition pastors out of the pastorate for other opportunities.
When we had sat down and talked about different podcast topics, it was definitely topics that we were like, do we really talk about this? Is this really that important? But then we started rehashing some of the stories of pastoral transitions in our lives that we've had. And we recognized that each of us, whether together as a married couple or individually before we knew each other, had lived through all 4 of these experiences. And there was different types of hurt in our own hearts and in the hearts of other people at that church that we felt we really just needed to discuss that. And so we're going to open this can of worms, and see where it leads. But know that it's not church bashing or anything like that. It's not how great one church handled it and how poorly another church handled it. This is all about how we can handle it.
Yeah, as individuals.
As individuals and children of God.
The first pastoral transition I went through was my pastor at First Baptist Elyria, Pastor Quick, had been there a long time, I think over 30 years. And he knew that he was sick. They had a plan, but his sickness progressed too quickly for the plan to come about. And so our church was left grieving. It was one of those things where if we had moved to get a new pastor right then, I think our church would have made a big mistake. And what the deacons and the other pastors did is they talked and recommended that the church have a pastor come in to help the church go through a grieving process and then search for a new pastor. And that was something that stuck out to me. I was a high school senior when this happened. Having that man of God help our church through the grieving process and really work through those emotions so that our church was ready and prepared for a new pastor. The new pastor was installed basically 1 year from when the previous pastor had passed away. Unfortunately, I started college, so I didn't get to be there for that. But it was...
But now he's kind of our boss. So.
Yeah, now he's our boss, which is awesome. And that's another transition that we can talk about. Amazing how God really worked in that situation. And he was a very good pastor to come in after that and be able to really rally the church up.
Absolutely. That was one of those cases that a lot of people give churches or even just organizations in general flack for handling leadership transitions poorly, right? But your home church did a great job of recognizing that there is hurt, there is grief, there is sorrow, there is a deep, long-standing relationship with this man of God for over 30 years leading this group of people. It's not something you get overnight. And to have that ability to grieve right then and there, I mean, the whole biblical principle of weep with those who weep, mourn with those who mourn, that's huge. It's not practiced very commonly today, but it's so vital, especially to a church or an organization's health. And so I think that's a key positive takeaway to that. And then the next person doesn't feel the weight as much as if he were to take it over in 2 weeks.
Right.
We'll cover another pastoral transition in a little bit, and it was just the opposite
Of that.
And the church kind of hurried through the pastoral transition, and it looked good for a little while, and then the screws just came loose.
But you went through some pastoral transitions when you were in high school and elementary?
And elementary. Yeah, I went through a couple.
So how did those go for you? Like what was your perspective on those?
The first one I don't remember very much because I was pretty small. So there, I don't even know if I know like the actual, real story behind it or whatever. I was always thankful for that pastor. He was the one that was with my parents through my open heart surgery and always just had a way about talking to kids in a good, professional, biblical way that I always just respected him. But I don't remember much of how he transitioned. And then the second transition was really just unfortunate because I was friends with the pastor's daughters and the son, and we were all kind of the same age, right? One might have been 2 or 3 years older, another 2 or 3 years younger. But essentially it was a inner church affair. And just sinful behavior and practices that were carrying on. And again, I was young. I probably wasn't even junior high yet. I was old enough to understand sin, but not different types of sin, right? And we were still of the age where mom and dads were trying to figure out how to explain what exactly an affair was. And so that was a very difficult time because I really respected him. He was one of the first people that helped me get into NASCAR, which I know is super silly, but like I would come to church every Sunday morning and he would give me a printout. Now remember, this is like late 90s. A printout off of the internet, which was a cool thing back in that day. And with my Bible, and I'd have a printout of like the race results and the series standings after that week. And he really took a liking to me. And not in a sinful way towards me. Not at all. It wasn't anything like that. And I really enjoyed his family. But he had some decisions, and some other people in the church had some decisions that just weren't godly at all. They were sinful and needed to be taken care of. So it was really a difficult thing because he was a very well-liked, charismatic person. And sometimes that goes really well until it doesn't go well at all.
Yeah.
And that was very much the case in that. And then the other one, much like you, I was either in college or a senior in high school. And the guy who came in after that guy had finally decided that a new opportunity was out there that he wanted to take. And that one was about as smooth as it could go. It was definitely, well, if you want to take this new opportunity, then maybe you shouldn't wait around in this little old river town too long to go take it. It was a respectful send-off, a nice refresh of how things maybe should look or could look, other than some of the other ones that my family had experienced previously that was filled with drama. And Mandy grew up in a little bit larger of a town than I did. So in my town, if you did something, literally everybody knew. And so that was really difficult to go, oh, you go to that church. So that was kind of my first experience. And I just thought like pastoral transitions were just that common, like 3 to 5 years and, well, thank you for your work, here's a new one kind of thing. Like that's just kind of how I grew up. And then I met Mandy and she told me about Pastor Quick and how he was there for over 30 years. And we got hired by Pastor Ed Sears here at Grace, and he was almost at 40 years. And I was like, whoa, like longevity in ministry is something to be completely astounded by.
And it's very interesting when you have pastors who have been in ministry at the same church for decades, really. It's very interesting because that's all I knew, you know, growing up. And then to find out that a lot of churches have a higher turnover every, 5 to 10 years is what a lot of them are. It's like, wow. To me, I just thank God that I was able to have Pastor Quick in my life and that he and his wife were huge examples of godliness and how to care for people, rocks in our church that people just loved. And I'm sure everyone has some sort of drama that happens or has things that go on, but when I look back and think about them, I don't remember really any big issues that came up, or if they did have issues, I'm sure that they were working with the people on those. And so it was a great example that they both laid. I'm so thankful for them. Looking at Grace, like Pastor Sears, he was a very, I would say, charismatic man.
Yes.
You
knew when he was in the building.
Yes, you did.
Not just the room, the building.
But he loved God. And he loved the people at Grace. And that just flowed out of him from the very first time that we spoke to him. And when we came down here, you could just tell how much he loved the people of God, especially at Grace. I think the biggest thing that I've seen from people that have been at their church that long is how much they love their people.
Mandy, when you went through not just, your first pastoral transition, but as you've gone through multiple pastoral transitions now, what would you say are some of the emotions, or of all of them, or maybe like one particular very strong emotion for one of them that really just stands out to you?
To know which one is going to be the biggest is going to determine how the pastor transitioned. With a death, the biggest would be grief. And for me, not only was I grieving my pastor, just his life that was here on earth, like I'm so thankful that he was with God and he wasn't hurting anymore. But with that, as you're growing up, you have dreams. And at the time, my dream was to get married at First Baptist of Elyria and have Pastor Quick do my ceremony because he did my parents. And every year at graduation, he would be the one that would be there with the diplomas. And because I was going into my senior year, all of those emotions hit me harder because I'm having to let go of that dream. And so not only was I grieving my pastor, but I was grieving the dreams that I had put in place for my life. That's something that I've had to grieve on other things too. Like as we were in our miscarriage podcast, I had to grieve, being pregnant for the first time and not having that worry. Definitely grieving is is a very interesting thing. When you have other transitions, whether it be sin or, well, I guess sin would be the one where it would be kind of hurt.
Yeah.
And just kind of working through, why did they make that decision?
Mm-hmm.
Because you're obviously not them. You don't know what they were struggling with, why they decided to do what they did.
Mm-hmm.
But you also are the one that has to kind of process that and be okay with not knowing, and be okay with the fact that I wouldn't have made that decision, but that doesn't make me any better. Even though that they made a poor decision doesn't make them the worst person in the world. And it also doesn't make them unlovable or unsavable. God still cares for them. God still loves them. God still saved them. Mistakes are made, and there are consequences to those mistakes, but they're not unredeemable. And so I think that was another one that sticks out the most.
I think for me, walking through some of them, anger and bitterness, and not like get angry and throw something or put your fist through a wall, but like that deep-seated anger of, why God? Why did you have to let this happen to somebody that I really enjoyed spending time with? Mm-hmm. Or I thought I respected this person and now I don't, and he's completely, lost trust with me. Getting over that kind of emotion is so difficult. It requires so much spiritual heart surgery to truly get over. And we're talking in pastoral transitions, but this is just in any anger or bitterness situation. It's truly, I'm convinced, one of the few spiritual sins. So much requires the Holy Spirit's involvement in your life, because you cannot do it on your own.
No.
You cannot forgive somebody that has hurt you on your own. You need Jesus so bad in those moments. I think the other thing that I've seen, I don't know if I've necessarily felt this, but I've seen in other people, especially those who, you would definitely consider Christians, you would definitely consider brothers or sisters, but put a very high priority on that pastoral leadership position, where the pastor is the man of God and he is near untouchable. They would never come out and say that, but how some of those people handle church and leadership in general, you can tell. Sometimes those people are the ones that react in sheer panic. No way, I can't believe it. This would never happen. Like denial, again, stages of grief. It all works out. The flip side of that is fear. Yeah. What is the church going to do? Oh no.
What are we going to do?
What are we going to do? Do we need to go to a different church? And it's like, this situation just occurred. You're in church. You're supposed to be living your belief out in God. And God is sovereign. God understands what's going on, even if you don't. I've been caught in that. I've had to have been reminded in my own life that God understands what he's doing and I don't.
Yeah.
But there are times where it almost seems like, whoa, okay, what kind of trust did you have in that person? Because it seems excessive.
I think that is evident in our first church transition that we had. We were fearful.
Mm-hmm. Oh, sure.
I don't think we'd say we panicked, but we were fearful. And so we ran. Mm-hmm. Looking back at it now, that probably wasn't the right decision. It was a decision that needed to be made, but not for that reason.
Correct. And we probably would have still ended up at the same place that we did in that transition.
Yes.
We would have ended up there probably a lot later on, and probably on a lot better ground. We had never been tested in that way, really individually a ton. And then we were together when it happened. We didn't know how to handle it.
Right. And I think that's why a lot of people respond with fear and panic, is because they've never been tested in that way and they don't know how to handle such situations.
Which is why we're talking about this.
Exactly.
We're trying to bring to light, like, hey, pastoral transition is normal. Like Mandy said, we don't have the statistics for it. Maybe I'll look something up and post it in the description. Your average pastor is not sticking around for 20 to 30 years, especially if you're in a smaller town community. This whole thing is normal. It's hard every time it happens. But how are you going to honor and glorify God through it and set that person up for success wherever they're going, however they're leaving?
Yeah. I think the best transitions are the retirement and the new opportunity ones. The new opportunity can be taken two different ways. I think a lot of people can be hurt because, we loved you. We thought that you were, our pastor, and now you're leaving us.
A sense of rejection.
Yeah. But there's also a sense of, there are times when your body, or the church body, sees the call on his life into this new ministry, and they go, wow, we're so excited for you for this new opportunity. And even though it hurts, because transition always hurts, they're so excited for them to have that new opportunity. And I think the same with retirement is, it hurts to see these people retire because we love them so much and we want them to still be there as the pastor, but at the same time, they're going to be so much better off.
Yep.
It's funny because when they retire, some stay in the area, and so they would still attend the church, or they'll still be around the church, which is,
that's a whole other conversation and topic for debate, because there are some pastors that will never, if they retire and have some good life left to live, they would never step foot back in that building again, other than to be invited back to speak. They're not going to attend the church. They're not going to have their old philosophy hang over the new guy, any of that. And it's not done out of disrespect or disregard. It's done out of respect for the church. And then there are other people that just stick around until the day that they die and love every minute of it, support the next guy, and it's a really beautiful thing to watch. But from what I've seen in conversations I've had with other pastors, there's no in between.
No.
And it's humorous to me.
The best thing with a retiring pastor is allowing your church to recognize them for the time that they have given and really celebrate, and then in one sense also grieve the loss of that pastor, because while he might not be dying, he is stepping down and he's not going to be in that role anymore. And so there will be a grieving process, not as much as a death.
Right, yeah, absolutely. But you still, it's a loss, right?
Yeah.
But it's also in those times where the pastor going out has vitality, has a life to live, and he's literally just saying, I have run the race, and I'm going to continue to run it on a volunteer level until God takes me home. But it is such an opportunity for him to step in and say, here's the next guy. It's different than your church's situation, where it's like they tried the transition, then
They
he's
had a
gone.
plan. Yeah.
And now it's time to grieve because there's true end. This one's more of this is where the church can really excel. Not many do. It's really hard. I mean, there are research articles about this. There are former pastors making a living now as communication people that write about this particular thing, and that is senior level leadership transition. It is a big hot button topic out there. But if you have a pastor that's retiring, he has an opportunity, and you as the church have an opportunity to really set the stage for that next man of God to come in and have the longevity that you were really looking for. A lot of churches, I think, collectively don't quite understand or process that, and that's fine because you're not in that mode, right? You're worrying about celebrating the pastor, making sure all the food's ordered and all of that. But you have the opportunity to set the stage for the next 5 years of your church in how you handle that transition.
Neither one of us have been on a pastoral search committee or anything like that. But one thing that a pastor mentioned to me the other day, and I think it goes to the same for pastoral candidates and missionaries visiting churches, is you never know what a person is truly like if you're just seeing them for a short period of time. Like if you're just going to watch them preach and then you go out for lunch, you don't really know that person. You need to spend time with them in multiple different settings, in multiple different areas to really get to know that person, because while they could probably keep up an act for a little bit, they're not going to be able to keep up an act the whole time.
And anybody can sell on who they are in even 72 hours, but 6 months to a year and a half, and that's when they become human to you. Anytime you switch a job, you always have what we call the honeymoon period, where, oh, this is the best job ever. I'm so glad I made this decision. Oh, I can't believe I didn't leave my old job soon enough. All these things run through your head.
Right.
And then it never fails. Like 6 months into a year of you into that new position, and it hits, and it's like, okay, this is just a job. That happens to a lot of churches with their new pastoral candidate. Mm-hmm. It's great. Oh, we're learning them. It's kind of like dating all over again in a weird instance, where you're trying to learn them, he's trying to learn you, and then all of a sudden you start finding like little patterns and quirks and how he operates, or you start realizing that he doesn't like your hymns, and he doesn't necessarily like this Bible study, he likes that Bible study. And it's not that he's trying to come in and change everything. He's just different. I think the hardest part for any pastoral transition for the new person is what we all struggle with in general, and that's the comparison trap.
Well, and some church bodies hate change, and it can really tear up a church with just a small change. And some churches thrive with change and embrace it and really work with it. And sometimes that can be really good, and sometimes having too much change can really hurt the church too. It's really hard as a new pastor coming in, knowing how quickly or slowly to take things in change. And I think one thing that we've learned as churchgoers going through pastoral transitions is the pastor that is put in the church is God ordained, whether for good or for bad. You know, there's always going to be good, and whether it turns out bad or not, he was still placed there. Now, obviously, if a pastor makes bad decisions, have sin issues, you know, at that point, obviously, you would not continue to follow them and try to, you know, help them in their ministry. But at the beginning, when you are starting to get to know these pastors, when they're like fresh to the church, don't know anyone, being a person that just comes up, encourages them as they're in this transition, I think is a huge thing.
Absolutely, especially if you had a great relationship with the pastor that was on his way out, or that, you know, whatever the reason for transition was. If you had a great relationship with that person, you're going to have a difficult time with the next person. And this is something Mandy and I learned when we were in transition for ministry, is that even if your church decides congregationally to say yay or nay to vote somebody in, there a lot of times are only about 2 to 10 people really pulling the strings. Sorry, Baptist churches, I just called you out. Secret alert. There's only 2 to 10 people really pulling the strings behind the scenes, and you get a whole debrief and download. Like, that was the one time I felt like that ministry was exclusive. When I joined it, was like, okay, here's the list of your kids, here are the families that are in here, and it wasn't bad, it wasn't dishonorable. It was more of like, we want to catch you up to speed about the family's history that you're going to be teaching, and you're going to be the youth pastor. But
Which was very helpful.
It was very helpful.
But it also almost damages your impression of the people, because you see them in a different light because of what you've heard.
Well, and it's really because it's also just one other human's perspective.
Right.
They'll see something through a glass that they see it through, and you go have a conversation with them, and for some reason, because you're the new one, they're much more open to you than they were the other guy.
Yeah.
And you go, oh, that's the situation they were talking about, but this is the motivation behind it. There's 4 sides to every story, so you take what you need to survive, but you then start realizing, okay, you start piecing things together, but it is difficult. And that was just a youth ministry position. I can't imagine what those kind of conversations are like at a senior level.
Yeah. As we got to know the church, Jeff and I would turn to each other and go, I don't think they really needed to warn us about this person. I think they probably should have said something about this person instead, because we had different personalities than the people that were in there before.
Different personalities, different philosophies, and we had no clue what we were doing.
Yeah. I
Like
will say,
the guy who is still at Grace now, which is a whole other conversation, he was the youth pastor before I was. Like, he trained to be in ministry. I have a counseling degree, and I was doing higher education, like, operations stuff.
yeah.
And knew that God had just called me into ministry. Brand new, knew enough to be dangerous, but not necessarily enough to really hit the ground like, yeah, this is who I am, and this is what we're going to do. And so the kids in a lot of ways helped shape my ministry, which was really awesome for that group where they were at, where their families were at, where the church was at. That's what they needed in that time. Mm-hmm. And again, we were the transitional pieces between a couple different things. So we've been churchgoers witnessing pastoral transitions, and we've also been pastoral transition pieces ourselves.
Yes.
And not at a senior level, but on that micro scale, and it's different.